This is about Westinghouse manufacturing.
How does this actually work?
Based on a article I did for the AWA Review a couple years ago. And it actually was a 2-year project to get the article together because we kept running into more things that took a little more research. And people have asked me, what made you want to spend 2 years working on figuring some of this stuff out? And I always just say, well, I grew up a mile and a half from Westinghouse, and it just seemed like a natural thing to be interested in. But that's not the real story. I saved that for you guys. When and I'll just, since Rich said I have all the time in the world, within reason, I'd give it a shot.
You have a snooze alert. That's the only thing.
Okay.
5 minutes after that, you're on
Snooze
your
alert. Well, in high school we had a mandatory science fair project, and a friend of mine, we were both wanting to do electronics projects. That's what we were interested in, but we certainly had no money. So when his father said to him, why don't you go to some of the factories around there and get parts contributed to your project? So we thought that was a great idea. So at school he said to me, Westinghouse, my bus passes that. Mine didn't. I'm about a mile and a half the other direction. And he said we could get the bus driver to leave us off. So sure enough, we get on the bus. He says to the guy, all right, if my friend comes on our ride, yeah. Can you drop us off in front of Westinghouse on Route 27? Yeah, whatever. Now you need a congressman to come and let you make a change. So we get trucking down there, and it's 4 lanes over there. And he just lets us off on the side. So before we started charging across 4 lanes, he didn't want to put the lights on because that's not a stop. So he says, let me pull out first, thinking, if there's a splat, he's gone, and we're over there. So we're out in front of the big plant, and I don't know if anyone remembers seeing that place, but it was a huge front lawn, one of those manicured, looks like they cut stripes in the lawn. And if you went in the center where he left us off, it would be like a half a mile to go around to come in the driveway, either direction, or about 100 yards straight across their lawn. Well, we trucked straight across the lawn, dragging book bags and coats, and we get to the big glass doors. It's a double-story glass wall, and we look behind us and say, I hope the guy we're talking to doesn't look out the window, because we just really made tracks, messed up the whole place. So we go in, and it's a huge, there's like a theater curtain at the back wall, 2 or 3 stories tall, glass front, marble floor. And way off in the distance is a little desk with the receptionist. So we go trucking across there, and we could see it's a beautiful young girl, probably in her mid-20s, very well dressed. And yes, to us we said, sophisticated older woman. So we get over there, and she says, gentlemen, what could I do for you? So we graduated to gentlemen right off the bat. And I couldn't talk at all. And my friend said, about the parts, science fair. So she says, let me call Mr. So-and-so. Maybe he can help you out with this. And I didn't know what she was going to call from, because the only thing on the desk was this huge thing with all the lighted buttons on it. And it was probably 1,000 extensions on a manual click for the right button. And she had a little handset on the bottom we didn't see. So she calls, and I hear, he's not there. No, I'll go get him. So she gets up, and we're watching, and it's click, click, click as she goes across the floor, finally gets out, and then it's like 2 high school kids go, did you see that? Did you see that? Yeah, but be good. Okay. So a few minutes later, door opens, click, click, click. Gentlemen, Mr. So-and-so will be with you in a couple minutes. Okay. So we're waiting, and a guy comes across, and he says, what can I do for you boys? So we were demoted from sophisticated gentlemen to boys. We didn't like that much, but he said, well, do you have a list? And sure enough, by some coincidence, we made a list. And we just resistors, capacitors, things. So he says, good, come back in a week, and we'll have it for you. And so in a week, then we had to walk a mile and a half to my place. My father comes home, can you do me a favor? And he says, whose window did you break? Can you give my friend a ride home? Sure. Get all that done. And then next week, it looked like a big drag to have to do this all over again, but the receptionist would probably be there. So we did it all again. And we got our parts and we did all right. The second thing that happened with Westinghouse happened on a cleanup week in Edison Township. They would do 2 times a year. You could put out anything you want. And I had made it my personal goal that we would always bring in more than we took out. So I was on the bike looking around for stuff. And in front of a house, probably a Westinghouse employee, was the entire guts to a round tube color set, 21-inch, picture tube, yoke coil, everything was there. And it's about 3/4 of a mile from my house. And I'm on a bike. So I start to truck home, and I'm saying to myself, it's going to be over 2 hours till my father gets home. But wait, Mr. DeFeeti across the street, he's got to be home. He just got out of the hospital yesterday. I'll ask him. So I go there, drop my bike down, I'm banging on the door. And no answer, and I'm saying, he's got to be here. He had a heart attack and a stroke. I can't understand where this guy would be. So sure enough, the door answers. He answers the door. This guy had helped us out with all kinds of crazy projects. So I said to him it's just over there. And he thinks for me and says, well, I'd really like to help you, but I don't have any gas in the car. I don't have any money. So I said, wait, I got $1 at home. That would get 3 gallons, 29 cents. So I go running and get the $1, come back. And I'd put my bike away and all, and he still wasn't to the car yet. And I was saying, this is a little slow. But he made it there, and we got up to the place, put the thing in the back. He stayed in the car, and we brought it home. And he asked if he could help take it in. I said, no, you might drop it. So I got it in myself. So, that was a couple of things with Westinghouse, because I got it working within a couple of days. It must have been that employee just was getting the new rectangular model and just putting it into his Westinghouse cabinet. Probably got the bezel and everything. So it was just a perfectly good set, a little arcing. But so in honor of that receptionist, that's why I did all this work. So George Westinghouse started the company with his air brake invention, and really Westinghouse Electric didn't come around until 1886, and that's when he got involved with, well, first off, he was really well regarded by his employees. He was one of the few that didn't have to have Pinkerton guards bringing people in. There were no strikes. He initiated the half days on Saturday, which was like unheard of at that time. He built homes for his employees, and if there was a problem in the plant, he took that fancy suit off and he dug in and worked on stuff with the guys there. This is to give you an idea of the scale, from a postcard showing the main plant in East Pittsburgh. And then he became a big proponent of AC electric. These are some early AC transformers down the bottom. And he made his deal with Tesla, because one of the big things that AC didn't have that DC had was a motor. So when Tesla invented the AC motor, that's in this picture of the polyphase system, they had a system going then, and would form that's when the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing really got rolling. This is a postcard of just the electric manufacturing and machine company in near Pittsburgh. One of the first challenges they had was they wanted to make their name known, so they went to bid on the Columbia Exposition to electrify what was like a World's Fair in Chicago, 1893. And for years, the Edison company wasn't going after people that were infringing on the patents. But when they lost the bid to Westinghouse, they decided time to enforce the patents. And they had to have thousands of bulbs. So they came up with this idea where the Edison patent states that it has to be a bulb in a sealed vacuum. They came up with a stopper bulb. So if you look at the bottom, they created the lamp, exhausted it, the glass lamp, exhausted it, and then that stopper is what held air from going back in, so it wasn't a sealed glass, it was a stopper glass. And it worked. They did a great job electrifying the fair. And the battle of the currents was really getting going. And Edison was doing some of his experiments with that they don't like to talk about in West Orange, and that was his experiments with the electric chair. And he decided to make one AC product because he said AC was so dangerous, and that was the electric chair. And when the first one was done up in Buffalo, it was miserable. The reporters that were there said you might as well have chopped the guy up or cooked him or something. It was just didn't work the way it was supposed to. But Edison, not to be deterred by that, actually suggested the name of the execution should be called Westinghousing somebody. It didn't catch on. But then they also did battle over the Niagara Falls generating station, and that's when AC really started to win the battle. This is an early picture of the generator's turbine room, I guess they called it at the plant. And the Niagara Falls Power Company in 1895. Another view from inside. But Westinghouse had to borrow a lot of money to do all this electrification. You could see one of the machine shop plants building the equipment in Pittsburgh. It was huge stuff, huge rooms, a lot of expense. But then what was happening was, you could say that Westinghouse won the battle of the currents, but he lost the war. In the financial panic of 1907, he loses control of the company to the big financial men, and never got it back, and he died in 1914. So what actually happened is Westinghouse died and probably never heard the word radio because it was still wireless back then. So everything that was done in radio with, under the Westinghouse name had no Westinghouse. The company started getting World War I contracts, and just another note, at the same time, Edison lost control of what was Edison General Electric, so neither one of them was in the electric business after the battle was over. For one of the World War I contracts was this SE-1012 receiver. I brought one over here, and they didn't build these in Pittsburgh. They had a plant in Newark where they were building lamps, light bulbs, and they made transmitters for the government contracts in East Pittsburgh and the radios in Newark. That's the Newark Works. And back in East Pittsburgh, that's when Frank Conrad started doing broadcasts from his garage to be able to test the transmitters and design the RA and DA. He's credited as being the first disc jockey. And they started making the RA and DA radios for the demand, settle the demand from department stores and all for people who wanted to hear his broadcasts. KDKA got started. And one of the ones, if you look at later, an RA over there is a Pittsburgh one with serial number 183, which could well have been like in the first couple of weeks of producing those. And then everything moved to East Springfield, Massachusetts. At the same time, Westinghouse was making a move to position itself in radio. They purchased the Nesco and the Fessenden patents. That's when they took the option and then later fully bought Armstrong's patents. And they started to try to establish themselves, because most of radio use at the time was radiogram kind of work. And they tried to establish themselves to compete against Marconi and RCA, and couldn't get established. They were too late in the game, and different routes were already set up. So one of the things that it seems like is their purpose, since they were unable to establish a radiogram service and the amateur field was so small, it seemed like they were making some of these moves just to not let GE have a monopoly on everything. So at the same time as the war was ending, or the war was still going on, Westinghouse had a contract to produce 1 million rifles for the Russian army. And that's what they had a plant that they had bought that had been making cars in East Springfield, Mass. And that's where they were making rifles. And when they were getting overwhelmed with the number of orders for RA and DA stuff, and you could see how big their operation was out there, that they just probably didn't, this little nuisance of radio was just in the way of all these giant machines they were making. So they sent that work out to modify the plant after the war contracts were finished, and started making the RAs and DAs in East Springfield. These are the broadcast radio models produced by Westinghouse before their deals with RCA in February 1922. So they had the RA, the DA, the RC, which is just the one box with the 2 sets in it, the crystal detector, there's one of those over here, and an areola junior and senior. But soon after that, they did become part of what was called the radio group, with GE and AT&T and Wireless Specialty all got together to share patents. And when the government came along after the war and said, basically created RCA, the idea was to keep everybody happy. They would split up the work, and they evaluated that that GE would get 60% of the work, Westinghouse would get 40%, RCA would do the marketing. There were little AT&T got to do the transmitters, and there was a small amount left. A couple of things were made by Wireless Specialty. I think a Radiola 9. So those are the models that were first done by the radio group. And RCA was dividing that production. It became hard to maintain, because if you had models that weren't selling well, then the other guy was saying, well, wait, we're not getting our share. And it wasn't something RCA could control. It was what customers were buying. So then they went on a plan. When you get to the Radiola 16s, 17s, and 18s, the same models were built by both companies, and they would place orders for 60% of what they wanted to have and 40% accordingly, and that smoothed out some of that ruffle. Then we get to where Sarnoff tries to begin a unification plan, because he still felt this was all too clumsy, and what he wanted to do was have both Westinghouse and GE stop producing themselves. They bought the Victor company, and they had been producing radios with Victor and the phonographs down in Camden. And the new plan was they would stop producing. RCA would produce everything, but they would also sell sets with the GE and Westinghouse name on them. And that's one of what, if you look at some of the models on earlier ones, there's a WR series. And this is one of the earlier ones. They made the tall grandfather clock one in a columette, and this tabletop WR10A. So this is a Westinghouse radio, and right on that tag it says manufactured by the RCA. And this is the list of all the WRs. This is part of why it took 2 years to do this, to look up different diagrams and stuff to see how this all got broken down. But the WR4 crossed to a Radiola 48, and right on down the line, there was an equivalent model that Westinghouse would sell under the WR name. So that unification didn't last very long. The Justice Department still saw this as a monopoly, and they wanted to break it up even more. And what they forced GE and Westinghouse to do was divest. So they got paid off in either stock or stock that they could sell, or cash. And for what happened with David Sarnoff is basically, this is where he used the phrase that the government dealt him lemons and he made lemonade out of it, because he now had control of it. They actually got a deal where Westinghouse and GE wouldn't compete for 2 years to give RCA a good start. And he ended up getting since Westinghouse wouldn't be in the business to manufacture stuff anymore, he made a trip to see Westinghouse in Pittsburgh and go for a rummage sale. And one of the things he found at the rummage sale, because it was basically stuff they couldn't use anymore, and people they couldn't use anymore. And one of them was David Sarnoff. That's where he met Vladimir Zworykin, and he liked the work that he was doing on early television, and he brought the Zworykin and his team to Camden. When they were selling the radio sets, they were doing it through Wesco, which is the Westinghouse Electric and Supply Company. And this was after the 2-year period was up. Wesco was like a wholesale store. If you were selling electrical products, if you were an electrician, if you were wiring houses, you can get things that Westinghouse made at the Wesco store. You had to be a distributor, and you could also buy radios, coffee makers, and sell them in your store, or if you were a small guy, just buy enough to sell through to your customers so they wouldn't have to shop. So that's how most of their sets in that time period were marketed. So that took us up to about 1935 and through 1942. And then all of a sudden we couldn't find any real track of there wasn't that correspondence anymore from RCA to Westinghouse models. And I ran into this on the back of a radio that I have, and it says made in USA by the D Corp of Detroit, which in best I could figure out meant Detrola. And after that one model, they stopped sharing producing a tag like that would give you any idea of who really made it. A lot of the tags started saying things like just doing an address for Wesco in New York or a place like that really wouldn't tell you where the radio came from. So I started doing a lot of research through model numbers and things and the rider books. And I thought I was onto something when I saw this scheme of the way the numbers ran, WR 100 to 199, figured maybe that was one manufacturer that they were using. But it turned out that was these categories that they had for model types. So like a 200 and up to 299 is an AC table radio, 300, 399 is console radios. So that didn't help me much. But we started to run into some that cross-referenced. And I kind of set a standard before. I'd say this one was a clone by a certain manufacturer, that I would try to find a diagram that matched and pictures of the models that matched. And if you look at some of these, you'll even see that the knobs are in the same pattern, the dial is about the same. So it's basically the exact same chassis inside, just a little bit different cabinet. And some of these you can see there by the tag and the tube layout and all. So the tube layout it was a quick clue, cabinet pictures looking the same, and then actually looking up the diagrams. And then I got some help from Ray Chase. He sent me some information on an article he did about these are your two radios, right, Ray? The Bosch and the, I think you sent me those pictures that I edited up. And what seemed to happen is, well, we were able to make this list here of when you got past the ones that RCA was involved in, what numbers went to Emerson and a bunch went to Bosch. And then by 1937, my trail went cold again. I couldn't find anything else from 37 to 42. And there was another clue that Bosch had been making some, and Bosch went out of the radio business just when the trail went cold, and Westinghouse was still making them, but I couldn't figure out where. So we started just making the assumption that a lot of that stuff was American Bosch. And we found out that at the same time, Westinghouse was moving out of their radio group that was in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts at the time, and they were going to, some people back to Pittsburgh, others to Baltimore. And Chicopee Falls, that happens to be where Bosch was. So I only had that as an assumption for a while. And the only other time I gave this talk in Maryland, after the talk, one of the guys from Chicopee Falls came up to me and said, it was no secret in Chicopee Falls. Everyone who worked, his uncle, his great uncle, all these people that worked for American Bosch knew that they were going to work to make Westinghouse radios. And that went on till production stopped for the war. And when those radio people did move out of there and went to Baltimore, they weren't really working on anything for radio anymore. They were building the SCR 270 radar sets. And as the war was progressing, they bought a plant in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, that had been in textiles or something, was empty. And they announced that would be for home radio products, but what it was still doing is that was taking the overload of all the defense work, and they were making, not wanting to tell the Germans or anybody they were making radar sets over there. That's what they did at first in Sunbury. This is a picture of the plant in Sunbury. Then after the war, they did set up for home radio division, they called it. And any models you find from post-war that have a model number that begins with H, they're home radio products division from Sunbury. For what was a big thing there, that when I was researching this, I figured that was like the biggest thing in Sunbury. I called up the library to ask if someone could tell me any stories about Westinghouse being there. And the girl that was supposed to be able to help with information had never heard of Westinghouse, asked me to spell Westinghouse, and then said that somebody would call me back, but nobody ever did. The Sunbury location, though, they were able to make some use of what became like a supply chain, especially in the earliest television. All the glass was made up in Corning. In Elmira area of New York, they were able to make their Reliatron tubes, small components, I guess finish off the CRTs with the glass that they got from Corning, and then just a train ride down to Sunbury for assembly. But they made pretty much all of their own parts, and this was also around the time when FM was starting out, and they were big believers in FM from the beginning. They started making transmitters. This picture, I got a call from another member of the Maryland Club, and he said that this transmitter in was it Paris Mountain in South Carolina, his father was the engineer there, and it was so remote that they built a house for them next to the transmitter. And he grew up there, and his family stayed there for years till his father retired. So these are some of the Westinghouse televisions. So they did want to get into that market. Unfortunately, Sunbury was still tied up finishing off some defense work, and they just used the same idea that they did with radios at the time. This would have been 1939. They just had RCA make the sets for them, and they have slightly different cabinets and different model numbers. And they're fairly rare because there's probably one surviving Westinghouse for every maybe 20 or so surviving RCA ones. So the model numbers, that's the 5-inch TV on the bottom right with the radio on the bottom. The one thing Westinghouse did do is they didn't use RCA's radios. They put their own radios in the cabinets. So they're this is the crossover. If you know some of the TV models, TT5 is a WRT 700 on down the line. So I don't know exactly why. One of the reasons I called the library out there in Sunbury was they decided to make a move and move to New Jersey, into Metuchen, which is that one that was near where I grew up. And I thought maybe one thing I saw a newspaper article about was a strike that employees had out there and moves to unionize. Maybe that had something to do with it. but they made plans to build a modern plant in Metuchen, right where Route 27 hits 287. And it was set back from the road, like I said. It was going to be the Miracle Mile production line. When you went through the whole zigzags, it was supposed to add up to a mile, and it would be the most efficient way to produce television and radio products. This would have been early 50s, and what happened is once again the Korean War started, and they started taking defense projects on. So if you look at the history lineage of TV sets, there were some that came from Sunbury, and then there was kind of a blank spot where nothing much happened for a few years, and that's because they were gearing up the plant and not having time with all the defense work they were doing. But the one thing that I found out that was a definite reason for moving to Metuchen was they wanted to get into color television. This is their 15-inch color set from 53 into 54. And if you were going to build color sets, you needed a test signal. And the test signals were coming from RCA's transmitter on the Empire State Building that you couldn't get in Sunbury. So they would have had the choice of either building their own whole color television cameras, everything you would need to move ahead, or move where you can get the signal. So they chose moving to where they could get the signal. And they did make a full line of products there. The one thing they did catch the wave on is when people were starting to get their second TV for the kids to watch. That's the 17-inch black and whites in the metal cans. And they were also early transistor radio people. The one I brought is actually a tube model, so they used the same cabinet to start making transistor sets. And they made everything, including their own transistors. So not many of the things you see would actually be a company that made all their components right down to the transistors. So I was able to track commercial and government radio divisions from 1912 through to 46 when they stopped using that name. And you can see the path down where they were making that set in Newark for the First World War, then East Pittsburgh, then Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts, and then down to Maryland. They were, their defense work in World War II just took the company, it was probably in the neighborhood of 50 times the business they were doing before that. One of the articles, they made some kind of a comment that in 1 year period during the war, they sold more radio products than they did, all to the government, than they did in all the years of radio work from the 1920 on, all government stuff. This is a collection of the different tags that I found with different locations. These are the ones, the WR35, the white one on the right, that's the ones that would have been sold in those West Coast stores. So it just said Westinghouse Electric International Company, New York City. Ones that did have a street address, it was just an office building. It wasn't actually a manufacturing building. And the one on the top left is the television radio division in Metuchen. And these are the divisions that manufactured radios and televisions going from 1920 through to 75. And we see that it ends up, they changed the name at the very end to the Portable Products Division was the last name that was coming out of, and it was then Edison, not Metuchen anymore. And I think the name Portable Products Divisions came in because they were actually importing stuff from Japan by that point. They weren't actually, some things they produced, some things they just retagged. And then in 1975 it was sold to Westinghouse. If you wanted to look back in the 1970s, when you get to the radio and television division at the bottom, these are all the divisions that were above them before you actually got to Westinghouse. Industries and International with the Westinghouse Electronic Components division of that, Electrical corporation division of that, and then finally radio and television. By the company itself had grown so big, by the 1970s, 100 divisions building over 1,000 products, $10 billion in business, 150,000 employees, products from nuclear power plants to light bulbs. And they actually had a division that produced office furniture only for their own divisions. So what could have gone wrong with such a setup as that? Well, one thing, they were building these nuclear power plants. Nobody would buy a power plant if they weren't assured of getting fuel for the power plant and what fuel would cost. So in the contracts, Westinghouse committed to a price. And then when the price shot up, they lost $2 billion supplying fuel to the plants that they had built. And then they were also in financial services, and at a time when everybody in financial services started losing money because of the economy at the time, and they lost $3 billion there. Some of their financial services included Westinghouse did floor planning for stores. So when I had a TV shop in the 70s, when I sold a Zenith TV, it was actually owned by Westinghouse, because the deal was Westinghouse financed what I bought. They would come to my place, they would pay Zenith for it, and if I sold it in the first month, I just paid back the amount, no interest. Next month it started going up at credit card interest rates. And so when I went bankrupt, I helped hurt Westinghouse. I didn't mean it. So they were trying to come up with what could be done. So there were a number of tries at new management, different new management again, different new management again. And then the last guy that is probably as well liked as some of Bob Bruce's friends at Bell Labs and other companies, they decided that the only division that was making money was the media divisions. And they had Group W Broadcasting, which had Mike Douglas show. They had a bunch of shows on. They owned a bunch of radio stations. They owned some TV stations. So they went ahead and put what money together they could, and they bought CBS. And they formed a new division of Westinghouse to sell other divisions away, or at least sell the rights to the name. And then finally, as they become so much media, they just changed their name to CBS. So as it says there, after 111 years, the Westinghouse stock market symbol was removed from the stock exchange. And in 2017, the Metuchen plant was torn down, and it's now an Amazon plant distribution center. And with the help of a friend, we rescued the last bricks that were in the plant, because they crushed the rest of them down to support the foundation on the outside. So they had a big brick crushing machine over there. And that's about it. I'd like to thank my inspiration for all of this. She's just as I remembered her. That's it. Thanks a lot, guys. Any questions?
We have a little time for Q&A. Anybody have some questions for Mike?
And Mark, did you see that Westinghouse radio in the museum?
I did. Yep. I saw it there.
What about their fan division? Did they have a division to make electric fans?
Yeah, it would have been part of electric and manufacturing, and I don't know how long they kept producing them. They had really nice ones back in the day.
Yeah.
I still have some that work just fine. Yeah.
You showed a list of television sets, and one of them said no audio.
Yeah, the tabletop, the RCA TT5, the 5-inch tabletop set, and the Westinghouse version had no audio section. You had to tune your radio to a station for the sound.
That was in 39, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and they had separate.
Yeah.
Did you do a little show and tell of what you got here?
Yeah, the model 1012 that they produced in Newark for World War I is on this side here, and it doesn't say Newark on the tag, but that's where it was made. This is the brick. And this is a product from Metuchen just before they were going to transistors. But the reason I brought these guys, you see the standard RA and DA. that everybody sees, and the two of them together would be the RC. But this has every configuration that you could have gotten. You could have started out with just the RA and bought the DB crystal detector, and you had a simple radio. If you lived next to Frank Conrad, you were set. And then they came out. Then you could have gotten the amplifier, detector amplifier, and later in Springfield they came out with an antenna tuner. People have said to me how broad these tuned. Well, if you had the antenna tuner too, then it made it into a 2-circuit tuner, less likely to interfere with neighbors, that kind of thing. And then they came out with an RF amplifier. So you've selected your station, 3 stages of RF amplifier, untuned, and then the detector amplifier. So you could basically, as you saved up your pennies, progress to better and better sets.
Mike, I've done a fair amount of work with the Navy, and when you go on Navy ships, particularly during World War II, Westinghouse was all the transmitters. I mean, they were big iron, and they were nice transmitters.
Yeah, well, like they said, that equaled all their business for all those years. And you could even see in there how the radio and television division went down the ladder, because the divisions that were doing the defense work were getting most of their attention.
Where did now I don't have it anymore. I had an old tombstone. I guess it was probably from around 1933, 34, Canadian Westinghouse.
Yeah, I saw that. I've seen tags like that too, and that's again where they were disguising who actually made it, because you could buy it in that West Coast store with Canadian, and I never found any plant in Canada that actually made them.
It's interesting because it said Canadian Westinghouse all over it.
Mm-hmm.
And even the dial where it said Westinghouse said Canadian above it, and there was even a sticker on the inside of it that I guess you needed a license to have a radio in Canada at that time.
Right.
It was a receiving.
Yeah. So my assumption was, when I started seeing those, that maybe they had an office facility there, and they could bring them in and not pay as much of a duty at the time or something like that. But it's the same as the sets that were made here by different manufacturers. Okay.
What is a radiogram?
A radiogram was well, first there were telegrams, and then when Marconi came along and wanted you to use his service instead of theirs, they called them Marconigrams. And when RCA took over for Marconi, they called them RCA radiograms. So it was just another way of sending a person-to-person message. I have some of the blanks you could fill out to send one.
I just want to add, when you started talking about the building, and you and your buddy went across the grass and ripped off the lawn and all that stuff, I was in that building in, I think it was 88 or 89, and I worked in there as an outside contractor. Mm-hmm. And the only thing they were making at the time was Westinghouse.
Yeah.
Air conditioners.
Yeah, they switched the building. It switched to appliances, but Westinghouse by that point was only a name that.
So I used to go in there, and I used to have to climb over things and ride on golf carts and bicycles to get to where.
Yeah, it was a big facility.
I was thinking, how's this thing? How could it hold up? Because this is all they were making. They had this small building line with air conditioners.
Yeah, no, it was just
it was destined to go down.
Yeah. And a lot of our neighborhood people lost their jobs too during all that time.
That was the plant that was up near 287.
Yeah.
We built the Costco on the old price.
Now there's a Costco, and before that S&H Green Stamps.
At one point they were doing distribution for White Consolidated, because I remember going there.
Yeah.
Because the distributor, I used to do appliance repair. The distributor that I used to buy from the Staten Island didn't have parts, and the guy said if you need the part right away,
that's where you go.
You can go to White Consolidated and touch it, and they.
Yeah, once White as a separate company just took over the name, I didn't track that anymore.
96, it was in the mid-90s, I think.
That you were there, yeah.
Still distributing there.
But then I guess the land just became more valuable than the building.
A huge facility.
Yeah.
Distribution.
That's bigger now as Amazon. Yeah. Yep.
Hi, they used to make, or Westinghouse came out with this little refrigerator, small radio on All American Pie.
Yeah.
And I guess it was a giveaway to buy Westinghouse refrigerators.
Yeah.
Those
Those were Sunbury. They were made in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. Yeah. They have it again. If there's an H in the model, and there is in that one, it was Sunbury.
Well, I've seen a lot of stuff. Now, I know that in the end, all the tubes came out of Elmira.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I know that division was spun off as Elmira Electronics. But I've seen a lot of stuff from Bloomfield. And I know that was supposed to be a light bulb plant, but I think I've even seen radios.
I don't ever found anything about a radio there. I think it's East Bloomfield. But that was a light bulb division. Yeah, I think when they left Newark, that's where they went for light bulbs.
Yeah. The partnership with Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
So did that last long?
What ended up happening is before Westinghouse totally had to give up his financial fight, Tesla actually signed over his patents to him for free. He never collected another. That's why he would live with pigeons. He just got no other royalties ever for the patents that he gave to.
So they started working together, I think, like in '88 or something like that. Shortly after the company formed.
Right.
When did they? Was it the patent? 1907? Is that when they?
That's when
they separated.
I don't know how long the battle was going on to save his finances, so that could have been maybe a couple of years earlier than that. But yeah, that was the final thing when the panic of 1907 hit. Oh, yeah.
It seems that Westinghouse through the years should be a bigger name than it is.
Oh, I know.
Seems like they did poorly. When they won the electrification award, they made money in air brakes first.
Mm-hmm.
And RCA and General Electric became much bigger than that. It's well as far as consumer no.
Well, think of GE now, Rick.
Yeah.
Yeah, they always get bean counters who switch them into financial services, who switch them into media.
Certainly a success story, but
Yeah.
it could have been better. Should have been better.
And if that switch over to the money people, actually, if you think the money people taking over in 1907, it lasted probably longer than nowadays. People would have squeezed every dime out of it faster than that.
Just curious, what were the air brakes used for back then?
Trains.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it was like a worldwide requirement because the air pressure kept the brake open so that when there was a failure, the brakes closed and the train had to stop.
Not unlike
from a compressor. Or a compressor pushed it apart, I believe.
Every car has through an airline.
Yeah, you'd see them hooking up the hoses when they connected.
It was tremendous boom of safety, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was, and he kept those other parts of the company. He only lost control of Westinghouse Electric.
But when GE was formed, I believe that Thompson and Houston were merged with Edison's stuff. So didn't GE get into AC pretty early?
Yeah, they were, Thompson Houston were believers in AC too.
I know that the date on that was 1892. It was just before the Columbian Exhibition.
Yeah, and when that became Edison General Electric, so Thompson Houston kind of became General Electric, then Edison General Electric, and Edison was still pushing for the AC, but then for DC, and when that went by, then he gave up electricity altogether and started making cement.
Phonographs.
Yes, phonographs were still going on.
Cement houses too.
There's a few places where I live up in Hunterdon County that are where they prepared cement and other things like that. And I have, when you went to the place and bought a bag of cement, there was a deposit on the bag. So I have one of the bags that never was returned. Can't find it. It's around somewhere. Yeah.
I remember about, it had to be in the mid to late 90s. All of a sudden, on the collector market, early eBay, all of a sudden there was like a flood of new old stock Westinghouse last gas tube clock radios. Plastic snapped together. Really the last tube stuff, really about 1964 or 5.
Yeah.
And they were everywhere, new in the boxes, sealed. There were like 3 different models. There was the Toll one and I still have one. But I always kind of wondered how this happened. But they were like, you would go to, they were showing up at all the meets. One guy brought a truck of them.
Yeah. It's amazing what's stuck in behind a places because only a few years ago, picture tubes that were used in the 1939 5-inch sets, new old stock, came up and they were sold through a supplier in Ohio. So, I mean, stuff just turns up.
I just wonder if that was out of if they were when they tore the plant down.
It could have been. I think we wore them out. Yeah.
I want to make a comment. There's going to be a movie about the current wars that's being advertised in October sometime. Yeah. It might be interesting to see about.
Yeah, like many things from Hollywood, I'm hoping not to be disappointed.
Fact check them, will you?
All right, Mike, we want to thank you again. You are